let's move on to question 4. This is our last long formatted question. This is also a good juicy one, so I'm going to set the stage for us. But for folks watching, listening, Reimagine Public Safety debate hosted by Imagine Black and produced by Labs. Let's get into question number 4. So in a recent public meeting on violence prevention, City of Portland evaluation specialist Ryan D'Ambrosio reported that gun violence in Portland has dropped 22% since 2023. Ryan highlighted that there is a 38% reduction in Black gun violence victims over the past year. The city is attributing that overall decline in shootings to the success of gun violence prevention programs that received funding from both the City of Portland as well as statewide allocations of the federal pandemic funds. So what we've seen is that there is this entity, this organization that was formed in partnership or carried on in partnership by the nonprofit POIC and the city's Office of Violent Prevention, and it's called Healing Hurt People. They offer counseling and outreach to community members at risk of gun violence, including victims of gun violence. So my question, I'm gonna start with you first, Timur, is how will you prioritize the continued funding and success of community-centered programs that have proven to prevent crime?
Sure. And I'll start kind of big picture. One of the reasons I ran for office was the city was not funding the next round of EPIM, which is East Portland in Motion. And really, for people, just for context, is that was people in East Portland coming together and saying, these are all the transportation projects we want, whether it's a bike lane on this street, sidewalk here, crosswalk here. And then more importantly, what they did is they prioritized those projects. And then that eventually got approved by city council in terms of that plan. And then council's role was then to fight for elected officials to fight both at the city level and state level of getting those resources for this kind of community-driven plan of what people wanted. And so that is all to say, I'm a believer that the community knows best what they want. And, my job is to kind of create those systems that allow the community to articulate their needs. And then my job as an elected official is to basically to fight for those resources. And so what I also know is that when gun violence occurs, the city spends tens of thousands of dollars, often within 30 minutes of, police response, fire response. And these are, as Candace said earlier, precious discretionary general fund dollars that can be spent on anything. And so anything that we can do upstream is huge in terms of prevention. And that's only the city's budget. I didn't even mention like the ambulance and the district attorney apparatus, all that stuff that comes afterwards. So anything we can do to prevent gun violence or that bullet being fired, I think is just going to be huge, both in terms of the human cost and trauma of it, but also the taxpayer and the city budget element of it as well.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over for 2 minutes. Just say the question again is, how will you prioritize the continued funding and success of community-centered programs that have proven to prevent crime?
Yeah. Well, first, these are good numbers, and I think it does speak to the fact that when we invest in these community-based programs, they give us the results we're looking for. Because I'm not seeing these kinds of numbers when we look at police's impact in our community. They're not producing those numbers because it doesn't work, right? And so I think that we need to be clear-eyed about what is actually making a difference and doubling down on that. I think also, we can't, I think the elephant in the room is poverty and the fact that we live in a country that aggressively criminalizes poverty while also expediting more people to become impoverished. And so that is why, we're talking, Timur and I keep bringing up these whole systems because these are the root causes. And if we're not prepared to address the root causes, then we're not ready to solve the problem. So I think that, my priority would lie in making sure that we're doing a good job as representatives from the community to City Hall to ensure that we're bringing them along, that their community relationships, their community data, I love the things that the Coalition of Communities of Color does to really turn our community's stories into data. We need so much more of that because those are the things that are going to help us create the right benchmarks, the right metrics, and help us create a plan and work towards something that will start to reduce, these numbers, right? So I think that's Definitely really important for a city councilor who's now going to have a more policy role, that and that is going to represent communities, and or that I am representing people that I live with, right, that live around me. I think that's going to really shape my perspective and how I'm coming into these budget decisions, which is ultimately what this is asking, right? How are we going to prioritize that? But I'm definitely somebody that I think East Portland will be able to count on to always put their voices first.
Thank you. Thank you both. I want to do a follow-up question as it relates to budgeting. Thank you so much because it sparked something in me. There's been quite a lot of attention, not just in Oregon, but I've seen in different parts of the country around this concept of participatory budgeting and how community members get involved in this. It seems like you all both are familiar with the concept. Kicking it to you, Timur, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about participatory budgeting? I know there's a campaign in the works right now, and thinking about like how do we experiment and start piloting this. But is this something that you're interested in seeing in the city? And what can you anticipate, or what do you think some of the outcomes could be?
Sure, yeah. Big proponent of participatory budgeting. My understanding is that campaign has paused and they're going to reframe and maybe launch in 2026 again. But I was someone that very much endorsed and supported that program. And really, I see it similar to the East Portland in Motion program I mentioned earlier, which is, any community member can submit a project. And then what happens is city staff help scope those projects and help determine kind of rough cost estimates, and then kind of package them into like a title and then something that can be like more bite-sized and can be voted on. And so the benefit of things like participatory budgeting is, it expands the pool of who's able to vote on something. And so it could include people who are not citizens, people under the age of 18, because, it's a city program. We can design it however we want. And so, and what we realize too is that allows people to feel more confident in their community. It's kind of a gateway of getting them more involved. And so, and that has huge impacts on mental health if you're able to affirmatively chart the future of your community. And we see, from based on other cities, how things like parks and shade and playgrounds have been just so important for kids and families that have been kind of neglected. And then I'll kind of end my time there by just also going back to this question, because I think it was important that I remember this, this was a hard-fought decision on council. And there were people, there was a political decision that needed to be made. And one political decision that could have been made was increasing the police budget. And that was on the table. And then another political decision that could have been made is investing in community-based gun violence prevention programs. And ultimately, because of the people on council, that is what ended up winning. And so these are very real decisions that do get made and have very real outcomes for our communities. And so I just tie that back to just this conversation and elections in general, because these things are not given. And particularly when we know these things have a huge impact on communities, it really does take proactive advocating for it, both on a community level and in the halls of power and in the seats of council.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna pass it to you as well and give you a little bit more time after the 2 minutes. Familiar with participatory budgeting as a high-level concept. Just curious what your stance is on it, and anything else you want to circle back to about this particular question about like budgets. It's a policy. We love budgets here, which is why you've heard it a few times for the viewers. But yeah, it's a political tool. I'm curious just for the first, participatory budgeting. How does that feel for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so as somebody who was on the Charter Commission, and the first round of charter was all of the things that we are seeing coming into effect in 2025, and then we had a second round, and I was really disappointed to see that participatory budgeting didn't make the cut, because I think what that tool provides is a direct way for people to see their voices turn into impact, into dollars. And so I am really supportive of it. I actually am part of this national coalition of women of color working in democracy. And there's this awesome colleague of mine that lives in North Carolina. She works in kind of the city manager office, if you will. And they have implemented an awesome awesome participatory budgeting program. And I think the outcomes that they're seeing about that is it can really help bring out things that the city just can't know. You just don't know when you're not on the ground what a community needs. And, as somebody like many of us here who has sat through long hours of testimony, waiting to talk, has sent in emails, has tried to lobby members of the council, and we know it's been such a barrier, right? And I think part of it, honestly, is just because of the way that the government is structured. Our council is not designed currently to provide the kind of constituent services that would require, or that would make something like participatory budgeting really successful. So I'm hoping this government transition will help with that overall. But yeah, I'm supportive of that. I think ultimately we need to create better ways for the people to see their voices in our decisions, and totally love that last point that Timur made, because all of these are decisions, right? Making that decision to put more money here versus here, and this is the outcome that we're seeing, and that is why we're running, right? Because I feel, or at least why I'm running, is because I feel that too often those decisions have turned to measures that are proven ineffective, that hurt my communities, and I'm ready to come in and make some different decisions.
Thank you so much, both of you. For those listening and watching, we are diving into question 4 for the Reimagine Public Safety debate. This is feeling like a really great synergy between. It's feeling more like a conversation.
I know. Can't we fight?
I know. Right? Y'all just making it so easy for me.
Save your energy. There's people we're gonna get.
Yeah.
There's some folks. And I'm very excited about this synergy. And there's something that, since we have some time, I want to ask about that. It's a little bit off book here, but I know you both are really embedded into the current city. So you may know a little bit more about the community safety office that we have. That was also something that came out of 2020. Just going back to that first question, you both kind of hinted and prioritized that street, or maybe the second question, that's, the street response team really should be seen almost equal as our police and fire. My question to you is, there's a lot of kind of change happening with the city structure in terms of, folks being bundled together under their deputy, and things are moving around. I'm gonna go to you first, Timur, but what do you see the role of this community safety office? You spoke a little bit earlier about how community safety should be embedded in every single bureau and office. Is that the role of this particular office? I say that because many of our members sometimes are like, what is this office? What do they do? We average community members, we have no idea what that looks like.
Sure.
What is your vision for this space?
Sure. And I love going back to the 30,000 foot level. So I'm gonna start there. It is, first of all, just a huge privilege to be able to have this conversation. And I mean that because in most other countries, as Candace and I, first generation immigrants, police is handled at the federal level. So if I have an issue with police as a person, I go to my mayor, who then the mayor is like begging the president for, police reform or whatever, right? So this is something just very unique to the U.S., that we have local control over local police. And if we don't leverage that in the way that in terms of our community outcomes and desires, then I think we're missing a huge opportunity. And what we've seen is, a lot of cities across the U.S., this really, programs like Portland Street Response really are the future for public safety. And so going back to the question, the role of the community safety division is, taking that big picture view. And I think that's partly, community safety division has a number of things that it does. One of those is the Safe Blocks program, which I mentioned earlier in reference to place-based interventions to gun violence, whether that's street lighting or street trees, or the evidence-based things that we know has a positive effect on gun violence. And so I think I really see them, not necessarily the implementer, because I think PBOT is still going to be doing the ones who are like installing the street lights, but really kind of the overseer and the strategic vision. And really an example that I can point to related to this is, in 2016, the city came up with the Vision Zero action plan, right, of trying to reduce traffic fatalities. And while the Transportation Bureau was in the driver's seat, it had very clear action items for every single bureau. So for example, for Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, they regulate the trash haulers. And one of those action items was to put truck guards so that when a big truck turns, it's less likely someone gets caught under it for bike pedestrian safety. And so I think that's really what I would like to see. The vision of the Division of Community Safety is, align those action items for every single bureau of what is your role in this and how can we help you so that we're all marching forward together.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna pass it to you. Same question. Just what do you see the charge of this division? Yeah.
Well, first, I'll take a moment to thank former Commissioner Joanne Hardesty because she was the reason that they created that division. And I think her vision for that was a precursor to what Charter's vision is. Because the goal of that division is to see all of the bureaus that touch community safety. Sure, it touches all of them, yes. But there are obviously, the first responder bureaus, right? Those are the ones that mostly need to be collaborative to look at this holistic strategy. I think that's also part of why the division was created, is because we just didn't have a strategy. And if we don't have a strategy that doesn't include all the bureaus that need to be part of it, then we weren't headed anywhere, right? And so I see that division under the new form. It's going to kind of transform into what we're calling the DCAs, right? Like the deputy chief administrators are going to oversee bureau kind of groups. Essentially, that's what the commissioners do now, but the way that they're grouped are often not aligned or don't make sense because it's very political. So I think being able to take the politics out of like how the bureaus are working together and really grouping them in their things that make the most common sense will help us create that like holistic strategy. So that's the ultimate goal. But I think the other goal needs to be like how we're leaning further into these community resources, community leaders, community organizations that are doing that work on the ground, because ultimately the city, it shouldn't be their job actually. They're not good at it, but it shouldn't be their job to know exactly what the community needs. Their job should be to find those resources, find those, bridges within our community and bring that information back and then use it, thoughtfully, and then make these political decisions to reinvest dollars in places that are proving to have these outcomes, right? Like, and that's, I think my approach going into this is like, how are we actually putting together benchmarks? As a former educator, I love me a rubric, I love some way to measure success. And that's what I think the city has not been good at. And I'm hoping through my leadership as a counselor, but then also in collaboration with the mayor's office, to be able to create some better strategies and benchmarks so that we can actually work towards our goals. Because I think right now, the reason that it's not working is because we don't have clear goals.
Thank you both for that.